okay, it's a real topic in people's lives, but it also sets in such a subtle way that we rarely recognize it. But it has so many ways in which it presents. Some of them, they start, remember, as from childhood up to adulthood. So you expect it from anyone, even a child can have mental illness. So most of the time what you'll see is that, remember I've told you, like in our simple way of defining it, you're talking about mood, you're talking about thinking, you're talking about behavior. So when you're looking at someone's mood, it's how this person relates with other people. So any change in this person's mood, either they are becoming a little more irritable, or they are becoming more withdrawn from other people, they're taking time like away from others, all those things. They're talking in a different way from what you know them. Any change in the way they talk, the way they are acting, it's a signal to a mental stressor to this person. They could be, if they are working, then the way they do their things, you see as if there's some sort of disorganization in the way they are talking or the way they are acting. It points to a mental illness. Yeah, there are those, we call them normal stressors, but that's exactly what we talk about when it's mental illness. That is it. That's mental illness.
Hello there, how are you doing? It's time for your favorite show every Monday to Wednesday right here on Ebru TV at 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. I am your new host, Purity Museo, and I want to thank you for always trusting my doctor show for all your health concerns, and we promise to be committed to ensuring that we got you covered. All right, our today's discussion will be on physical and mental abuse. And just to bring you to speed on what is happening in the country or worldwide is that 1 in every 3 women, that is according to the World Health Organization, are going through mental abuse. And here in Kenya, the same the World Health Organization says that 42% of the population here in the country are going through the same problem. And the problem, the impact is so much that most of the cases would require psychological aid. So that is what we are talking about today. And as always, you're welcome to be part of this discussion. Remember to talk to us, ask us questions or your feedback. The hashtag to use will always be my doctor. Our Twitter handle is at Ebru TV Kenya. My Twitter handle is at Purity_Museo. You can also interact with us through our Facebook page, Ebru TV Kenya. Or even send us your SMS. The SMS line is 20268. The number to call will always be displayed right on your screen. All right, it's time now to introduce to you our guest today. We have very important special guest today. And okay, on next to me is Margaret Mbudi. She is a lead psychologist at it's Family Wellness Center. Yes, all right, and next to her is Alan Kimani. He works with Nairobi Counseling Services. Welcome both of you to this show.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming. I hope I have a luxury to ask either of you any question concerning the physical and mental abuse.
That's okay.
All right. Yeah. So we begin with the basics. We want to begin with to understand what really this problem is. What is mental health? Would you please take us through the mind? What happens when someone is going through this problem? Would you start with Alan?
Okay.
Yeah.
Mental health is just basically being well. It's a state of well-being, and mental health is there for something that is kind of dynamic. It's normal to experience stress from time to time. It's normal to be sad once in a while. It's normal to be happy, but not that, not lows that are too low or highs that are too high, but there's a routine regular life,
right,
where you're content, where you're mostly satisfied, that kind of thing, without necessarily being, say, stressed, overly stressed,
right,
or pulled in different directions. So that way you can actually go about living your life and doing what you need to do. Yeah.
All right, and we're both talking about mental abuse and physical abuse. I'm sure we're going to have a distinction with the two.
Yes.
But now, talking about mental abuse, he's defined what this problem is.
No, I've defined what mental health is.
Yes.
I haven't really talked about
mental abuse. So let's now talk about mental abuse. We all know when you're abused, what kind of issues that you're going through, But what exactly is mental abuse?
Thank you for having me on studio.
All right, you're welcome.
Yes. Mental abuse is, it involves violence, but not in the physical, but violence that affects you at the psychological level. It's about this individual or the victim or the person who is being abused being in a position where you're feeling vulnerable, you're feeling helpless, you're feeling worthless, because what it is that is happening to you, even though there is nothing really physical going on, there's a lot of threat, there's a lot of intimidation, there's a lot of put down and everything else that comes with it that leaves you at the mental level feeling not capable, feeling not competent enough, feeling you're not in your right state, let's put it that way, because of what is happening in the environment and where you are at.
And because we're talking about mental and physical abuse, specifically in relationships, what leads to that, Alan?
Well, it could be many different things. It could be a conflict between the two people. More often than not, because I deal with a lot of domestic kind of, couples issues. There's a lot of quarreling, there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of, people moving in different directions while they're still in the relationship, dissatisfaction, strife. People feel moved to either find affairs, lie to their partners, go their separate lives, just generally living together, but really unhappy in ways where it could be considered, it's almost like people are cruel to each other. There's an element of, I've heard terms like this person is abusive, this person plays with my mind, this person doesn't respect me. Everything that goes contrary to what it means to have a happy relationship, where it has deteriorated to become, I don't know, something like strife. People are just at each other's necks. That can become abusive, because that allows for the kinds of exchanges that lead people to always be anxious, to be depressed, to feel like you can't really open up with this person, to feel on edge. And over time, that sort of thing, that sort of stress wears a person down. And you start to become, you start to feel less than, and it starts to wear you in a way that just makes a person, or even the quality of the entire relationship just suffers as a result.
All right, and just before we get to the symptoms of the person being abused or the abuser, maybe Margaret, you could take us through how common are these cases of mental abuse in terms of where are we as a country? I know you have clients, you go through these all the time. So where are we as a country in terms of the numbers, statistics of people going through this in the country right now?
All right, thank you. One, in terms of specific and actual data, as a country, we are not very good at that. And so we tend to rely a lot on what we get from the WHO, the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organization is talking about 35%, and that's leaning towards women. 1 in every 3 women are likely to go through some form of mental abuse. However, and I said as a country, we are not very good in data. It's because then we have a lot of abuse going on that is not reported. And so it's difficult to keep statistics and the data up to date. And we'll either go to WHO or we are going to go to the KDHS to give us the statistics. But what we are saying is that if you look at even World Health Organization statistics, which is credible statistics to work with, 35% it's not anything we can wish away. 1 in every 3 women is not anything that we can wish away. And that's just what is reported. So what about what is not reported? It's very, very, very common. And mental abuse or psychological abuse will be the starting point before you even get to the physical abuse. For every person who is going through physical abuse, whether it's a male gender or female gender, the first thing that will have happened to them is that they have gone through a lot of a lot of psychological or mental abuse. Yes, and it's very common in families to the children. They are also emotionally, psychologically, mentally abused quite a lot. It's also very common among what we call the intimate partner relationships. And in intimate partner relationships, it's not necessarily those who are in a marriage setup per se, But even those who are, you know, in an intimate relationship like your fiancé, there's a lot of also mental abuse that is going on. Yeah.
And yes, we are getting back to you, but let's talk to Alan in regard. We cannot ignore the fact that men are too going through mental abuse, but many people, both women and men, do not want to come out and talk about it. Maybe what are some of the factors that are making people not to shy away from talking about these issues?
In my view, it's probably shame. It's probably a sense of not really being able to recognize how far the problem has gone, how deep it is. Because, for example, in my practice, you know, people come when things are already quite serious and they've never been to counseling before. So for them, it's really hard to open up because they feel like it's embarrassing, it's shameful. They feel like they're the only ones that can, you know, nobody else can understand them. And it just basically, abuse creates a kind of atmosphere in a person's mind where they feel like they're isolated. They feel as though maybe they can't speak about their problems. They, you know, nobody would be able to understand them. If they come for help, they have to censor themselves and stuff like that.
All right, and we are talking about physical and mental abuse. Please talk to us. The SMS line is 20268. We have in studio Margaret Mbudi and Alan Kimani. If you have any issues in regard to that, this is the right show to be watching right now. And we want to now look at someone who's being abused. What are, for example, what are the symptoms, or what are the signs, what are the indicators that when you look at this person, you would tell that this person is going through mental abuse?
First, let's start by saying why have people been subjected to mental abuse, irrespective of whether it's male or female?
Right.
Abuse is purely about power and control, and it's about trying to, as you know, you want to assert your position in the relationship or in the family that you're in, and because the person who is the perpetrator or the abuser wants their presence and their position felt, that's when we begin now to engage in the game of power and control. And it's trying to show or demonstrate that, look, I am this, this is my position in this relationship. And that is as a result of many other things, which I believe we can talk about later. And one of the things that you realize about someone who is going through mental abuse specifically, they tend to have an extremely low sense of self-esteem. And this is explained by the fact that mental abuse is about put down. It's about showdown. It's about, you know, tearing the person, chipping into their esteem and trying to destroy them. That's what abusers, and especially mental abusers, are very good at. They are masters at finishing your sense of self and your sense of self-confidence. So you find that the abused person has a really, really low sense of self-esteem because of all the telling down that has been going on. The second thing that you see is that this person is terrified. They are afraid, they are fearful, because mental abuse comes with threats, intimidation, and humiliation and dominance. So the person being abused tends to be extremely fearful. And they always are, they have this, you know, like, always looking over their shoulders. They are hyper vigilant. It's like they're always looking over their shoulders, because then you don't know when this is going. When will I get the next, you know, telling down? When is this going to happen? So they're extremely intimidated by the person who is abusing them.
Alan, take us through the abuser. Do they even know what they are causing to their partners?
First, before I even go there, I think it's important to address the elephant in the room, which is that most men are the ones who are the perpetrators. Which is important because it helps to put into perspective the whole issue. It doesn't happen equally between men and women. There are men who are abused in their marriages, but I can assure you that the last time I read anything in the newspapers, it was like maybe 5 or 10% of marriages, maybe in Kenya or something like that. But the larger number are women that are being put down by men. Your question was? My question was,
okay, because now you've talked about women being the larger group here.
Yes.
Why is so? Does culture has to do with
Yeah,
this?
do the men know? Do they? Yeah, I would say that some do. Some, I think it has something to do with culture that we live in. Nobody really knows why there's domestic violence per se, but it's assumed one of the things is something called male privilege.
Right.
Where, and also because women themselves are maybe also not socialized in a way to think of themselves as people who can actually be equal to men in maybe a relationship setting, whereby, and that has also, and then there's tradition and that kind of thing. I'll give you an example. Recently, President Yoweri Museveni said something about men who abuse women are cowards and so, and then some MP in Uganda said, no, women should be trampled on and put in line and so on and so forth. And that gives you an idea of somebody who thinks of what they're doing in a particular way, but his wife may have a completely different story to tell.
Right.
Yeah? So sometimes they do, but they do know what they're doing, but only to a certain extent or a certain degree. Probably they think that they're doing the right thing,
Right.
in quotes. But the problem with abuse is this: if you engage too much in it, it's this is what I try to teach my clients. You know how when they say that a nuclear bomb doesn't just blow up, it also leaves radiation,
Right.
and it makes a place uninhabitable for a long time. So that whatever the abuse is like living in a state, is a poisoned environment, okay? So yes, if you're a guy or if you're a woman or whatever, and you're engaging in this thing, you're only contributing to a toxic kind of environment. All you're breathing in is toxicity, all you're giving out is toxicity. And as women, I think a lot of ladies are socialized to believe that their role is to somehow to be the keepers of the relationship. It's up to them to keep the home, to keep everything afloat and so on and so forth. But
Is that so?
I think a lot of women are socialized to go out and look for relationships, isn't it? I mean,
Maybe Margaret, because you're a woman.
I don't know. I don't know. What do you think?
Let me just answer the question
Yeah.
that Purity asked, you know, adding on to what he has said. When it comes to abuse, it's we tend to have a culture that normalizes abuse, you know, even listening to the examples that he has given.
Right.
And normalizing it also in the sense that sometimes you hear of cultures that will actually, you know, say, you need to fight, you need to beat, you need to do that kind of a thing, and that is what is considered, you know, discipline and that kind of a thing.
Right.
We also have a culture that normalizes abuse in the sense that we really, you know, your neighbor, they keep fighting,
Right.
but we do not do anything about it because it doesn't concern us as a, you know, as a family, until it really gets out of hand, and the next thing you hear is someone is injured, you know, someone has killed the whole family. That's when we all wake up to, oh, it was a serious thing. So the fact that as a society we tend to be mum about it,
Right.
it's our way of keeping the abuse going on. It's our contribution, and that's how we perpetuate abuse going on. The other thing is that, of course, the abused, they don't speak up because of intimidation. And if you imagine a case of maybe this is a lady, she doesn't have a job, and she's 100% dependent on the abuser. So the fact that she's economically disempowered and disenfranchised, that keeps her in that relationship, not because she's getting anything, any happiness or anything worth out of it, but it's because of her status. So
Right.
there are those people who will have the abuse, who are going to be abused because of many other factors that surround them. And like I said earlier, abuse is purely about power and control. It's about who is the one who is calling the shots here.
Right.
Why are we fighting about power? I mean, it's common knowledge that the man is the head of the family, whichever way we look at it, whichever culture we come from. And this power is maybe because the abuser, let me use the case of a man, maybe because the man, we need to go back to their family of origin and where he was brought up. Because an abuser has a history, a very, very high likelihood that he has a history of abuse.
Right.
He went through abuse. Maybe not necessarily, you know, directed to him, but he was a witness. If you grow up in a family where there's a lot of abuse, you witness that. And
Right.
you just grow up and that shapes your personality in a certain way, and you are more at risk becoming an abuser than someone who didn't grow up in a family that was very, very violent.
Right.
And these are some of the things that helps us understand and explain what goes on in the mind of an abuser.
Right.
Maybe he doesn't even make the connection between I am an abuser today because of what happened to me as I grew up.
Right, and there was a question I was asking Alan, whether do they know that whatever they are doing is an abuse to the partner?
Yes and no, and no to the extent that it's, you know, the abuser is also someone who is suffering. They have their own sense of inadequacies that they are trying to deal with. And so sometimes some of the things that they would do will be as a result of the inadequacies that are innate, that are inside them, and they become the motivations and the drive that push them to do certain things. Yes, of course, they also tend to do certain things when they are, you know, very well alert and in their awareness state. But the bottom line is, what is the motivation?
Right.
Why do I need to intimidate and threaten this person? That only comes when you're not comfortable with yourself first and foremost, and when you have some sense of emptiness, some sense of struggles that you're dealing with at a personal level, and the only way to make yourself feel better and feel a little like in power and control, then you will end up doing things that border on abusive behavior. Yeah.
All right, and yes, I can see some of your SMSs. Trust me, we will be looking at them shortly. But before that, we want to talk with Alan. Alan, what are the characteristics of an abuser? Because we are talking about mental and physical abuse in relationships. I just want to know, on behalf of my viewers, whether can I be able to look at you and say, I think this is an abuser? Can I also be able to look at you and say, I think this is a nice person, is not an abuser? What are the characteristics of an abuser?
Some of the things that come to my mind include things like someone who's entitled. They feel like they're owed something, which, you know, ties into what you were saying about power. Someone who wants to assert their dominance, even though they are kind of in pain themselves, kind of takes it upon themselves to just stamp their authority, regardless of whether or not they have properly consulted with this person. There's a sense of self-centeredness. I guess there's also a sense of immaturity in the sense that by the time you're resorting to this kind of behavior, it just means that you're probably not mature enough to find other ways to solve a problem. Okay? And there's the self-centeredness, there's a possessiveness, there's a controlling, insecure, jealous. I mean, if we're talking about, you know, like domestic violence, okay? Intimidating, and somewhere in that whole picture is the sense that this person has been through something. There's a saying, hurt people hurt others. So maybe this person has been hurt, but again, like you were saying, there's a disconnect. They may find themselves doing it. They may be surprised that they do this kind of thing. They may beg for forgiveness. And every time they're forgiven by the partner, they feel as though, you know, it has absolved them. But in actual fact, it just, you know, it just keeps going. It's just a cycle that is going. So what I would say is that there's a sense of disconnect, and I think that that's important. Yes, they know. Yes, but on another level, it's like they're on automatic pilot, you know? You know, the car is driving itself.
All right. He's talked about you're jealous, but sometimes it's hard to know whether this person is jealous until that point that you've interacted with that person. Do we have identifiable characteristics?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
And you know, just adding on to what he said, some are pretty, you know, so obvious and so open. It's just that because you're so engrossed in this relationship, you actually don't pick the red flags. But the red flags are there way well before you even get into marriage. And one of them is that you need to look out. A potential abuser, their need for control outweighs their capacity for love. And how do you tell that someone's need for control outweighs the capacity for love? This is the person who will be like, where are you? Who are you with? You've taken so long. And this is the kind of a person who wants to isolate you from the other people. You know, the person who tells you, I don't like your friends, but there's really nothing wrong with my friends.
Right.
It's just that he is so afraid that you have a support system and he wants to cut that support system so that it's easier for him to keep you in check and for him to control you. The person who wants also to isolate you from your family.
Right.
Because abusers, they also want to make sure that you're isolated from your family. He'll be the kind of a person who is dependent on substance use. And whenever something happens, and then he will use the substance use as an excuse
Right.
of what happened and the abusive behavior. The other red flag that people really, really need to look out for is he doesn't accept responsibility.
Right.
He's always the victim. And you're always to blame, no
Right.
matter what happens.
See
You're
what
always
you made me do.
Yes, you see, you didn't say that. If you didn't take so long
Well,
out,
that's a non-issue.
Yes, he's never a problem. He's always right. You're always the one on the wrong. And so he plays the victim
Right.
while actually he's using that to abuse you. And that's basically because they are good at manipulating. Very, very good at manipulating people. Yeah.
All right. And Alan, let me just ask, we have an abuser who is doing all these things. She was talking about some of the factors contributing that may contribute to that. But then how do you come out of that? Or basically, to make it simpler, what happens to the person being abused? What happens, take us through what happens in their minds. How does this affect them slowly by slowly, and what does it lead to?
What it leads to is, you've actually asked two questions. One is, how does the partner come out of this? And how does the partner sink into this to begin with?
Yes.
You find yourself, like you were saying, very engrossed.
Yes.
Let's say both people are very engrossed in each other. They call it love. It's probably a combination of lust, infatuation, maybe a bit of love, etc., etc. But you know, it's a nice emotional space, and pretty soon you find you don't wear this, you don't dress like this, you don't hang out with these friends, you don't do this, you don't do that, you know, that kind of thing. You don't go home as often as you might have. You don't deal with these kinds of people. He's the one who takes you to work and maybe even picks you up from work. If you're in a meeting with your boss, he wants to know, you know, are you really doing this and that with your boss, and so, you know, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
In some cases, some men control their women by insisting that they give them their money to keep for them, and from whatever they've kept, you know, give the wife some kind of pocket money. Some may actually take that, and actually, I've seen cases where the husband uses the wife's money even
Right.
to support other women, you know, that kind of thing. And one of the ways in which this a person can come out of this is basically by just reclaiming their power slowly
Right.
by slowly. For example, in the case of a lady that's being abused, I might, as a psychological intervention, tell her to, you know, you need to start, you know, telling your family what's going on, okay? Oh, no, I can't tell my family this, that, and the other. Well, they need to know what you're up to. They need to know what's going on in your life, okay? You need to start, you know, thinking about if you can't get a lawyer. You know, you need to consult with a lawyer in case you have properties together,
Right.
in case you have kids, you know, and you have to, you know, split up.
Right.
You know, you need to have some money of your own. You know, you need to have a bit of your own life. So over time, now this is simply a therapeutic approach. Yours might be different, but over time, what it does is that it starts to burst the little bubble that this lady has found herself in, and it starts to expand her life. Because now when you start bringing in other family members,
Right.
they can actually even go to the man's side and say, look, we didn't give you our daughter for your son to keep beating up and that kind of thing. And over time, you find that you start breaking some of the negative patterns,
Right.
you know, that have become established. When you start breaking those, then things start working differently. Because in essence, what you've done is the philosophy is that if you keep doing the same thing, you're going to keep getting the same result, right? So in order to get a different result, you do something different.
Okay.
So if you push somebody to stop, you know, isolating, to stop hiding, to stop making excuses for the guy, to, you know, come out of that victimhood, to seek support and that kind of thing, then you start opening up the marriage and the health of the marriage. Or, I mean, while it might be a bad marriage,
Right.
but the general health of the marriage starts to improve, even though the man or the victimizer may feel that it's not improving, but it does start to improve.
All right.
You know.
Okay, we're coming back to look at now seeking help and way forward for both the abuser and someone being abused. But we want to take a very quick break. Remember, when we come back, those are some of the issues we will be looking at. As well, it's time that we will be looking at your feedback. Keep asking your questions. The SMS number is 20268. We are back. Do stay with us. Welcome back, and in case you're joining us for the first time, this is my doctor show, and we are talking about physical and mental abuse. And with me in studio is Margaret Mbudi. She's a leading psychologist at Family Wellness Center, and Alan Kimani as well, who is based at Nairobi Counseling Services, right? Yes. Welcome back to the second part of this show.
Thank you.
And so before we continue, we have David. I know we'll be getting back. He's asking whether he can get your contacts for both of you. I'm sure, David, they'll be giving you your contacts before the end of the show. We also have Koech from Cabernet. He's asking, how does it affect someone?
Okay.
Yeah? I think we can start with him before we continue. How does mental abuse affect someone?
All right, thank you, Koech. Mental abuse, just like any other form of abuse, has both short-term and long-term effects.
Right.
I'm careful. I am really, really concerned about the long-term effects because eventually that's what happens. But the short-term effects among them is that, one, because we said of the intimidation and the fear and the harassment and the dominance that the perpetrator has over the victim, is they tend to feel very low in terms of their sense of self-worth. Because you're constantly being put down. So you find that the victim has a very low sense of self-esteem and sense of self-worth. That basically means they are incapable of giving themselves a self-appraisal that is positive. Because you know the person who is putting you down is a significant person in your life. It's your spouse, it's your parent, it's someone who is very, very close to you. Right. So the more they tend to put you down, the more you sort of tend to internalize it and believe that this is true. In terms of the long-term effects, abuse and suicide are very closely related. Right. Over time, the victim tends to become suicidal or gets to entertain suicidal ideations. They tend to also want to move more towards substance use and become dependent on substance use as a way of trying to get what you would call a psychological painkiller, because there's too much happening on the other side. I just need, time out or a break. I need some few moments when I am numbing to what is happening. And that's how a lot of them will end up into substance use. This is very common for women, what you describe as a Stockholm syndrome. And the Stockholm syndrome is where the abused person tends to do things and identify with the abuser, because then they interpret the situation that my survival is dependent on this person. Right. If I'm going to continue to live and if nothing bad is going to happen to me, it's because my life depends on this person. So they tend even to make excuses for the abuser. They tend to identify with them. They will try and rationalize the abusive relationship. Right. By the time someone gets to that level, then purity, we are saying, that person has been in a very, very, very abusive and toxic relationship, like he was saying, for a very, very long time. Right. And that will be very difficult for the person to seek help at that particular time. All right.
And just before we continue, we want to have a look at some home remedies for this problem. Okay. If my director has that ready. All right, we've just had a look at some of the home remedies, and we are going actually to be talking about that on how seeking help. Basically, it's about seeking help. And so before that, just staying with you, Margaret, please take us through, do we have patterns for abuse?
Yes.
Yes.
Abuse follows a cycle. It has 3 phases. Some people will talk about 4 phases, but it has 3 phases. And the first phase is what we call the tension building phase.
Right.
What is it that is happening in this stage is that you realize that there is quite a lot of tension. There's a lot of anxiety that is going on. The abused especially can tell that something is just about to happen. You know, there'll be the nil by mouth, there'll be the shoveling, there'll be the telling off, there'll be a word, you know, thrown in there, an intimidation thrown in here, there, that keeps the abused on their toes. At this stage, the abused tends to make peace. You know, is looking for peace at whatever cost,
Right.
just to make sure that they don't move on they don't get into the next stage. And they will also be making excuses. You know, they'll be apologizing. And the person apologizing here is the abused.
Right.
Because you remember the abuser tends to minimize the abuse. Because it's always about the other person and never about me. I'm perfect. It's always about you.
Right.
So
And you should not complain
and
about
you shouldn't
anything.
complain, you know. After all, you're the reason. I mean, I did that because you did 1, 2, 3. Then they move on to the second phase. And the second phase is the eruptive phase. This is where when physical violence takes place. This is when, you know, things literally erupt. It's there's physical, there's emotional, there's psychological, there's every form of abuse that goes on. The eruptive phase is very short-lived initially. And I'm using the word initially.
Right.
It's very short-lived initially. Then it is followed by the calm phase. Some people will refer to it as the honeymoon phase.
Right.
And the calm phase is when we are apologizing. The abuser will be apologizing. I am sorry, I'm not going to do that again. It's because I came home drunk. It's because I was stressed up at work. It's because you answered me. You know, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And in this phase, it's very peaceful. Very, 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 very peaceful. There is not even a bad word thrown during the calm phase. It is the phase anyone who is going through abuse will tell you they received their most expensive gift
Right.
as a way of trying to make up. And it is this phase that I refer to as the false hope that keeps people in the abuse. Because then you'll be arguing, it looks like we are out of the woods now because we are having peace, because it's, you know, all nice and we are together and we are going out together and we love each other. We
Right.
just seem to be where we started. And before you know it, then you get back to the tension phase.
Right.
What happens over time is that the duration between the calm and the tension phase reduces
Right.
over time. And the calm phase becomes smaller. The period
So it's like
shortens.
the second phase, the tertiary.
The first phase is the tension, then you come to the eruptive, then you come to the final phase, which is the calm
The calm,
phase. And from the calm phase, we go back to the cycle
All
again,
right.
and we go back to the tension. Now, what keeps people in an abusive relationship is what happens at the calm phase.
Right.
Because it's what sort of tells you we are okay now. He's very apologetic and he's promising things, you know, have changed, we will never get back there. Then you go back to the cycle again.
Right.
And then over time, then you keep to move, go through the cycle very, 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 very fast. And, you know, it's repeating itself very fast. Sadly, the abused people just don't notice the pattern. They will probably